like video, people get distracted by like the YouTube thumbnails on the side, blogs, other people get distracted. But audio really has your undivided attention when you're listening. So I think that this opportunity to get into the ears of a listener and really convey what you want to say in a setting where they get to hear your voice and hear how passionately you speak, I think that's a massive benefit for yoga teachers.
Welcome to the All Mats Taken podcast. I'm your host, Adrienne Jarrett, and today myself and the wonderful guest, Sam Guia, are talking about how to use guest podcasting as a marketing strategy in your wellness business. Now, when you want to learn about podcasting in the wellness sector, Sam is the man to talk to. He is the host of the Mics to Millions podcast, where he shares interviews with top-tier hosts, expert insights, and solo episodes aimed at helping health and fitness and wellness podcast hosts scale and grow their shows. And he is also the co-founder of Podridden, which is the full-service agency that he runs with his wife, and which specializes in helping health, fitness, and wellness businesses grow through strategic podcast guesting. So in this episode, Sam shares his expert insight on how to become a successful podcast guest, from finding the right shows and crafting a compelling pitch to nailing the interview and leveraging it long after it goes live. So this is not just a one and done strategy, which is one reason why I love podcasting. So by the end of this, you will have a clear strategy and the confidence to start pitching yourself as a podcast guest. I'm very excited to dive into this. I obviously have a love of podcasting too. So if podcasting is something that you'd be interested in getting into, definitely have a listen, and you'll see that you don't actually have to have your own podcast to really leverage this as a marketing strategy. With that in mind, let's jump into today's episode. Welcome, Sam. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. How did you first get into podcasting, and what made you really fall in love with this marketing medium?
Yeah, so in 2016, I left the UK. I was just confident that I was just going to find somewhere else that I felt comfortable. And I left with a backpack and spent 8 months traveling, and arrived in Medellin, Colombia, after traveling through the US and Central America, down to South America. I managed to find an internship at a media company. And within a year, I had a job there working as a writer for that time. But I fell in love with podcasting, and I put forward the idea of podcasting in the company. I got the green light and started a podcast for the company, then started another. And that was in 2017 that all happened. And then 2018, we really kicked off the podcast, and things just really gained momentum, I suppose. And in 2021, I ended up going part-time with that media company, and I went part-time with a podcast guest booking agency. So for the past 3 years prior, I had been on the receiving end of podcast guest pitches. And then I made the transition to 50-50 of being a podcast host and producer, and then the other half of my time sending out pitches on behalf of clients to get them booked on shows. And then in 2023, I stepped away from both businesses, and my wife and I, she comes from a background of working in PR as a senior writer. We formed Podridden together, which we launched in the start of 2024. And that's a brief history of my experience in podcasting. But really, I just fell in love with the medium because I love the fact I don't have to use my eyes. I can actually do yoga, for example. Yoga and like foam rolling are the two things that I do the most while listening to podcasts. And I love that. I love giving my eyes a break from screens.
Yeah, and I think it's a very intimate medium in that respect, because people are just bringing you into their lives if they're listening to podcasts. And I think that's a really fun aspect to this sort of long form content. Like YouTube, you still have to be watching something. You're still kind of more focused, whereas it's almost like background engagement a little bit. And what made you really focus on working with yoga teachers when you launched Podwritten?
So I previously had a connection with Kelly Smith. She is the founder of Yoga for You. She's also the host of Mindful in Minutes meditation. And she has this huge show, 250,000 monthly listeners. And she's someone that I've been working with for years at the time, even before launching Podwritten. And working with her, just really connected with her, I suppose, because I love yoga. And I was able to get her booked on a lot of shows, and we created a lot of content together. And I really enjoyed that. And I think working with her really showed me that there's so much potential in this space for yoga teachers to grow and get their message out there. And it's not just something like, oh, I'm doing it as a job. It's something that I'm really passionate about. I practice yoga every day. I practice yoga all over the world in different places. And I see the struggles that yoga teachers have when it comes to marketing, getting their message out there, like being heard in this sea of like online yoga teachers and online content creators in the yoga space. So I feel first of all, there's a real demand, there's a real need. I personally have experience and interest, and it was just fortunate enough that Kelly and I were able to work together. And that's also led to many other kind of collaborations and other clients in the yoga space who have seen the work we've done or had some kind of connection, and then they want to work with me and work with Podwritten. And it's kind of like an upward spiral from there.
Mm. And I have to thank you for the connection to Kelly Smith as well, because you reached out to me and she's wonderful. And I've now done her Yoga Nidra training course, which is awesome. So thank you for that. She's a wonderful person. Definitely go check Kelly's podcast out if anyone hasn't seen it yet. And what do you think the benefits of podcasting are for yoga teachers specifically?
Yeah, as you mentioned earlier, it's a really intimate medium. And I think that if someone's going to follow a yoga teacher, they're going to follow someone because they feel a real connection to that individual, that person. Because there's so many online, there's so many people to choose from. And it's like you get this choice paralysis. It's who am I, like, if I'm passionate about yoga, like, where do I even start? Who do I even begin? Who aligns with the type of yoga I want to do? Who aligns with the values that I pursue in practicing yoga? And when you get an uninterrupted 30, 45-minute, even an hour or longer conversation with a yoga teacher, and someone hears you and they get to hear why you started, your values, what motivates you, how you help people, the before and after impact that you have of helping people practice yoga. Listeners get this connection, this intimate connection, which isn't really found in other forms of media. I mean, I think a podcast is somewhere where people really devote their time and it's uninterrupted. On average, I believe Buzzsprout, a top podcasting platform, and I've heard this before with Bumper, another top podcasting company within the industry. They say that audio podcasts are generally, on average, consumed up to 80%. So a listener will consume 80% of the content. And there's not quite the same when you look at other forms of content. So like video, people get distracted by like the YouTube thumbnails on the side. Blogs, other people get distracted. But audio really has your undivided attention when you're listening, and you can just hold it so much more. So I think that this opportunity to get into the ears of a listener and really convey what you want to say in a setting where they get to hear your voice and hear how passionately you speak, I think that's a massive benefit for yoga teachers.
Hmm. Yeah, and just thinking about my own experience with podcasts, that really resonates because you'll play it and then you put it down and then maybe you're cooking or something. You're not like just sitting there on the scroll getting distracted really easily. So that makes sense. Do you think that podcasting could be useful if for people that are trying to build an in-person yoga business, or is this more like it's in digital marketing, more useful for those in the online space?
I would say that, well, because of podcasts' global reach, it definitely does lend itself more to the benefit of those with some sort of online service, online offering. And that doesn't have to be a big thing. That could be like maybe you just sell access to some videos, you have a book to sell. It really can be quite easy to have some sort of online or digital offering that's small. And it's very advantageous to those yoga teachers. But at the same time, it's also very helpful for those looking to grow like a physical in practice. For example, we previously worked with Andrew Singer, who is running Flying Tree Yoga in Medellin, Colombia, a fantastic yoga studio. And we got him booked on a number of podcasts, and his intention was to attract yoga teachers to participate in his yoga internship and yoga teacher training. And that was really beneficial for him because Medellin, for example, it's quite fortunate in the sense that it has a lot of digital nomads, a lot of tourism. Lots of people are coming there from all over the world, particularly the US, because it's quite close to the US, where you've got this huge market of yoga teachers who are looking to like branch out or take their next step within their career or do something different, or even just live abroad briefly and practice their Spanish. So even though he didn't focus on this digital offering, he was very much focused on growing his in-person studio and attracting a certain type of yoga teacher. That was getting on podcasts was really beneficial to get his message out there. So certainly it can be useful for anyone, regardless of whether you're a yoga teacher with digital products to sell or online kind of offerings, or if you just have an in-person studio, you can use that to your advantage just by boosting your SEO, for example, through podcast guesting, building credibility, authority. So if someone's, I might check this yoga studio out. Maybe I'll go there and I click on your website, and then you've got like an as seen in page, and then they click on it, or as heard, maybe. I guess that's more appropriate. They go onto this press page of yours and they see that like the owner or the teachers there have been featured on all these different yoga podcasts. It adds this credibility where you're like, okay, this isn't someone who just rented a space and set up a website. This is someone who's actually really engaged and well respected in the community. I want to go practice yoga here. This is legit.
That makes sense. And I'm just thinking about going back to that intimacy thing. I imagine for like in person, it could potentially help you build your community if you've got more touch points with them rather than just that one class a week or something. They can come and listen to you and have you in your ear and develop that sort of friendship, I suppose. I often think of people, some of them you're like, I wish they were my best friend.
I get that. And there's a funny thing where I hear in podcasting, sometimes people, when they meet someone who they've heard on a podcast, and this podcast doesn't even need to be big or famous, but sometimes people be like, I feel like I'm talking to a celebrity, or it kind of gives you this vibe of you're kind of like well known or sought after, or it gives you this kind of aura. So I can imagine if someone does come into your studio and they're like, oh yeah, I've listened to your podcast loads, it kind of gives them this, it helps you hit the ground running and building a relationship and this kind of sense of familiarity.
So for any yoga teachers that are like, Sam, you have sold me, I am ready to become the most sought after podcast guest in the industry, what should they do before even getting started?
So much like I mentioned with the opportunities that you have with advertising yourself as someone that's going after buy my digital products, buy my services, or come to my studio, you have to understand what's motivating you. Like, why do you want to be on podcasts? Is your goal because you have a book coming out and you want to promote that? Do you have a retreat coming up? Are you looking to promote your in-person studio? Do you have an online video series or some membership subscription that you want to promote? It's really important to understand like why you're trying to get onto podcasts. And then with this, that will guide the type of podcast that you choose to go on and also your messaging, because you can tailor everything around that end goal. So once you understand what exactly it is that you want to achieve through podcast guesting, you'll want to find shows that align with your goal. So you really want to find the right podcast, not just any show that will take you, because there are millions of podcasts out there and not all of them will get you in front of the audience you want or bring you closer to your goals. So be very intentional with the shows that you want to get on and ask yourself, like, does this podcast speak to the audience that I want to go after? Does it have good reach in the sense of, are people listening or saying positive things in the comments? Does it seem professional? Listen to the show. Is the audio quality good? Does it sound like the host is actually interested or putting effort into it? Is it worth your time? And then you can assess, make these assessments by Apple Podcasts is quite good because you can check out the ratings, and people will leave ratings to say what they think and give them a number of stars. So you can kind of assess the show that way. You can also go onto social media. Does the host post on social media? Are people engaging in the comments? They liking the posts, and just really assessing it that way. And then before sending a pitch, once you've created this list of shows that you're like, okay, I've selected these shows look really good. You'll want to do a lot of research into the host, who they are, listen to the show. And when you send a pitch, then you'll want to really refine the message to make sure it fits them, because there's this idea of volume is important. It's like you need to send quantity of pitches, send as much out as you can. When really you want to make it quality, you want to select the shows that you really want to go after and send pitches where you absolutely have shown, I've listened to your show, this is why I think I'd be a good fit, and really give them everything. You want to make it so that the host has to do the least amount of guesswork as possible. So they don't have to think, okay, yeah, you're a yoga teacher, but what are you actually going to talk about? And be specific. Say, oh, well, I know you've mentioned this. I'd love to add on to this topic. Or I have a different perspective that I'd love to bring to your show. I know you speak about this and your audience comes to learn about X. I can help teach with insights on X, Y, Z. So really, really make it specific in that sense. That would be my advice.
That's good advice. Like, how can you serve their audience? And how is that audience really someone you want to get in front of? I've had quite a few pitches from yoga teachers that want to get on the show, but they want to talk about the benefits of yoga that wouldn't necessarily serve a yoga teacher. And I'm like, I'd love to have you on at some point, but we need to find something that aligns with the audience, because it's not only that the host might not want them on, it's also that it's not getting you in front of the right people as well. So it's just like a bit of a waste of time unless you take that time to really think about that and refine that. What do you think ultimately makes a great or a successful podcast guest episode if you're being a guest on someone else's show?
Mm-hmm. So a few things. I would say, first of all, make sure you're adding value. And the way you do that is by giving them insights that they can actually take away. So when they leave, they know more than they did coming in. And that doesn't mean being promotional. And when I say more, they know more. It's not like more about your offer, more about this. It's you actually adding value and giving them information that they can then later use. But also, you want to be very kind of like engaged with the host. You want to have that connection. That's why doing this research is important. Not every host is going to be like a best friends forever sort of episode. But at the same time, you want to be selective of hosts that you're going to have like good chemistry with and you can imagine like connecting well with. So I think that's really important. But certainly delivering value, with walking that line between delivering value without being overly promotional is really important, and tailoring your message for the audience. So, for example, in this episode that we're recording right now, I'm going to make sure that all the facts and information that I share is to yoga teachers, because I'm specifically speaking to yoga teachers. If I came on here and I just use the phrase like, oh, business owners or entrepreneurs, or if you're used to speaking to a specific kind of audience and you don't tailor your message to suit the podcast that you're speaking on to the audience you're speaking to, then the messaging doesn't really fit as well and doesn't align as well. And it kind of makes you look like you haven't done your homework or you're not like the expert in this space. So make sure you add value, make sure you know who you're trying to add the value for. And I think for your own sake, this isn't necessarily to the benefit of the listener, but for yourself, if you're going to make it worthwhile, make sure that you are promotional, but organically. So you recently asked about like how podcast guesting can help those in the online space, but also potentially if they have a practice and what's the difference. I gave the example of Andrew from Flying Tree Yoga, and that was a perfect fit. That was a completely organic example, but it does demonstrate, look, here's a yoga teacher that I've worked with, and it kind of shows how we've had that impact. And you want to do the same in your interviews. You want to be able to deliver examples that really drive a message home and educate your audience, but you get to kind of like show off a little bit about, this is what I do, this is how I help. So I think walking that line between being promotional while also adding a lot of value for the audience in a way that benefits them is probably the best opportunity to deliver a fantastic guest interview.
Mm. And then as a guest, what can you do to really make the most out of that episode and leverage the work put in other than just recording the episode and walking away and hoping for the best?
Excellent. Yeah. So I would say a good call to action obviously happens at the end of the episode, so it's still during the recording. But a good call to action, and I say that because what you want the audience to leave with at the end is the next step. You want them to be able to continue to be thinking about you and working with you, and that means like actually having something good for them to go and listen to, like giving them a good reason to continue following you or continue keeping up with you. And that means like having things like a good newsletter or a good lead magnet or something along those lines, or some kind of compelling reason for them to want to keep working with you. And then beyond that, when it comes to the actual episode going live and being published, share it in your newsletter if you have one. One of the funny things that happens a lot is clients might share their features on social media, but miss it in their newsletter. And I think there's this idea that we're always trying to get in front of new audiences, but we forget about the audience that we currently have. And the fact that there's many people in your audience who are interested in you and probably are on the precipice or close to buying something from you, but maybe they just need that extra push, and sharing your recent interview could be the thing that makes them say, you know what, I am ready to work with Sam, or something along those lines. So I think share it in your newsletter. Obviously, share it on social media. A good host will give you assets that you can share. If they don't, then you can make those assets yourself. Or there are many kind of social media where you could just share text, like LinkedIn or X or something like that. And if you're a yoga teacher that is like more active on TikTok or Instagram, because I understand it's a very kind of visual hobby or practice, work, whatever you want to call it, whatever it is for you. And you can always just share an image of yourself just doing what you do usually with yoga, but then post about how this episode has just come out and it's something special. So I think that's really important. And on top of that, leveraging the relationships that you build through podcast guesting. Often, once we connect with someone with a podcast, we see that like they record the podcast, then that's it. They don't necessarily keep up to date with the host. They don't communicate with them beyond that. But the clients that we work with who see real success are those who actually keep that momentum going. They look for other ways to collaborate, whether that be an Instagram live or a speaking opportunity in their networks, or simply producing more content together, whether that be a podcast swap, blog swap, something different. And there are so many more opportunities. And that's why where I mentioned choose hosts who you feel like you're going to get along with well, because this partnership, this relationship doesn't need to finish once the episode has been recorded. It can go on for a lot longer, and you can both support each other and raise your audiences for a long time beyond the episode recording.
Yeah, and I remember listening to, I can't remember who it was now, but it was on a podcast, and she was saying the most successful episodes she's had from guests are ones that the guest shares them, like, not all the time, but regularly. Like, it's not just a one and done share. They, if appropriate later, they'll come back and they'll share that they were on that episode. So it's like continually leveraging it rather than just thinking of it as like a once-off thing. It is an evergreen thing that is probably not out there forever, but for a long, long time that you can come back to regularly. But in this, because a lot of guests will have their standard kind of pitch of the things that you want to talk about, or your expertise, and you're trying to get in front of a new audience. How do you then share with your own audience to keep your hosts happy? Because hosts generally would appreciate it if guests share it, but without fatiguing your audience by continually just sharing the exact same talk with them effectively over and over and over again, just in different places.
Yeah, that can be tough, especially if the host asks questions which are the same as everything else. That's also why this is a fantastic interview, because you've done a great job of scratching well below the surface and digging deeper. So I really appreciate that. So that's going to really help me when I come to sharing this. I'll have a lot more to say. But it is difficult. And I think it's one of those things where maybe you just have to look at what you mentioned in the episode, which maybe was slightly different, or maybe look for some other kind of hook as to why this relates to your audience in a different way that maybe past episodes didn't. And I think that you kind of have to get creative there. Potentially as well, I think you should consider constantly updating what it is you say on podcasts. So it can be really easy to fall into the habit of answering the same questions with the same examples and the same speeches. And sometimes I catch myself doing that, where I'll listen to a podcast and I'm like, oh, you know what? I sound like I did in previous podcast episodes there. But I think updating your examples is really good. And naturally, if you're a yoga teacher that is practicing every day and you're working with clients, you're busy, you're going to be developing those examples anyway. So the example that you gave of a client a year ago, you might realize, oh, you know what? I've got a fresh example with another client from 2 months ago. And that's when you can mention that client instead. And then when you do come to share the episode, you can talk about the new client that you just helped, rather than giving the example of the client from, I don't know, a year ago, 2 years ago, or whatever it is. So I would definitely recommend try and keep your topics on your side as fresh as possible. And that will help give you more content, fresh content to share in each interview as you continue to go through these interviews.
That's good advice. And do you need to have your own podcast to go and be a guest?
Absolutely not. No. Not at all. And that's one of the things I really like about podcast guesting. I mean, obviously, both are fantastic. They both have their benefits. In an ideal world, I'd recommend have a podcast and podcast guests, but we don't live in an ideal world. And let's face it, we all have a finite amount of time that we can dedicate to marketing our business, because we want to do yoga. Like you want to help people do yoga. You want to practice yoga. I mean, I'd love to spend more time doing yoga. I'm not going to, but we've also got these businesses to run as well. So it's all about balance. I completely get that. And when it comes to how you allocate your time with podcasting, whether that be podcast guesting or making your own podcast, one of the real benefits I see to podcast guesting, well, there's a number of them over having your own podcast. First of all, the commitment. If you have your own podcast, you know this. I have to tell you this, and anyone listening that has a podcast, it's real commitment. You have to show up every week, at least I'd recommend once a week, and you have to show up with a high quality episode, and you have to deliver that for, I mean, most of the time it's at least a year, 2 years, 3 years before you ever really see a strong following or audience come from that podcast realistically. And that is a lot of work. That's a lot of episodes, lots of hours, and it can definitely be worthwhile. But the good thing about podcast guesting is there is no commitment. You just turn up. You can send out a ton of interviews, or send out a ton of pitches to get yourself booked. You can work with a podcast guest booking agency like ours, Podwritten, and we can get you booked on shows, and you can just appear on a ton of podcasts and then clock off, and then you're done. Like, you can go guest on a load of them, or you can take some time off and then come back to it. And it's really easy in that sense. You can just dip in and out whenever you want. It's not to say that this strategy doesn't require a certain sense of commitment, in the sense of you can't just be like, I'm going to be a podcast guest for 1 week and that's it. You do want to invest more time into the strategy, but it's not like podcasting where you really do need years, I would say, to get the same kind of momentum. And the other benefit with podcast guesting is that you're immediately stepping into someone's audience that has been potentially, as I said, been gathering and like galvanizing by the host for years. So this is a great example. You have been working on this podcast for a long time, right? Like, when did you start this podcast?
May last year. So just 14 months ago.
So for the past 14 months, you've been bringing this audience together. And then today, I get to step in here and immediately get to speak to and be endorsed by, because you've said wonderful things about me, the audience that you've gathered. And it's really nice to have that opportunity to have someone build a community and then bring you into it and say, this person is someone I respect. I've decided to have them on the show and I want to share their insights and their thoughts with all of you today. So that's really valuable as a podcast guest, to be able to have that kind of access to someone's community and the endorsement that comes with it. That's fantastic.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And you don't have to sit down and edit. How long do you recommend that you should stick to a podcast guesting strategy to start seeing some kind of results from it?
hmm So we ask for our clients anyway, we have a commitment of 6 months. So we say to the client, 6 months is the minimum that we can work together, because there's this testing phase. So for example, when you start off, you really want to understand, like, when I'm sending out these pitches, when you've decided on your topics, you decided why you're podcast guesting, you want to go out there and you want to test what's working. So you send out pitches and you'll see, our podcast host responding to this message? Are they not? If they are, fantastic, double down and keep sending out those pitches. If they're not, then go away, try a different topic, try a different approach, and track every podcast pitch that you send. And ideally, you want to measure the success of these pitches. This is something that we do internally with our customer design database, so that we can understand what is working and what's not working, and where we can make improvements to enhance our strategy. And one of the reasons we ask for that 6-month commitment is because there is a long lead time in podcasting, and that's something that people often forget about. So to put that into numbers, according to our internal data, it takes roughly 13 days for our pitch to be sent and a podcast host to say yes, that they want someone on the show. And then following that, it takes roughly 34 days between the podcast host saying yes and then the episode taking place. And then it's about another 32 days, I believe, between the episode being recorded and the episode going live. So it takes about 2 or 3 months between sending the pitch out to the episode going live. And that's really important to understand, because we have this immediacy that we really demand and desire in modern society. And you get something and you expect it right away. But in podcasting, as you said, there's editing to be done, there's preparation, good things take time. And a lot of these content creators, they don't have huge teams behind them. They are just either hiring one person or they're doing it on their own. And good quality podcasts require that attention to detail and focus. And even then, I've worked with very large podcasts who have big teams behind them, and still there'll be months before an episode goes out, because they're planning everything well in advance. So if you enter with this expectation of, I'm going to spend a week guesting on podcasts, then they'll all go live the next week, and then I'm going to get a ton of leads come in, there's there's a delay between each of these. And I think it's important to know that, because this is well worth your time. This is valuable. And there's a reason there's a whole industry set up around podcast guesting. And there's a reason that we have so many people come to us and want to work with us, because this is a proven strategy of success, but it does take time. So I would say, make sure that you have that 6-month commitment, whether you decide to go with a podcast guest booking agency like ourselves, or whether you plan to send out pitches yourself. Make sure that you know, okay, over the next 6 months, I'm going to track, I'm going to send pitches, I'm going to get into a habit, I'm going to get into a routine of pitching, and I'm going to measure the success of this. And yeah, it's going to be 6 months, and that's the minimum that I can devote to this.
Hmm. And it could even be longer. Depends on how the host runs. I batch everything, so it's potentially a lot longer than 2 months before an episode will be released. How many episodes do you think in that 6 months someone would have to record, I suppose, to see any results, like regardless of the time frame?
So that again depends on many factors. First of all, it depends on the selection of shows that you choose. If you're good at selecting your shows, then you can really get on some podcasts within your niche or really get on well-aligned shows, and that's going to set you up for success far better than if you're just sloppy and you just try and get onto whatever shows you can and you don't give it much thought. So that's really important, first of all. The majority of our clients that come to us over that 6-month period, and this really varies a lot because some clients come to us and they're like, you know what, I don't mind about the size of the show. I'm more focused on getting on as many shows as I can. We still obviously make sure they're aligned because we're not about placing our clients on any show where our podcast host will take them. We want to make sure that these are shows that are going to move them closer to their business goals. And that's that when a client comes to us like that, it gives us more opportunities. Some clients might come to us and say, you know what, I just want to be on very specific shows with very specific reach and specific audience sizes or social media followings. And that makes it more difficult to get a volume of shows, but we really then are refining the quality and we're following that. But on average, from that 6-month period, we usually see anywhere between 15 to 25 podcast appearances. But it's important to remember that these are high quality and these are really tailored for the yoga teachers that are coming to us. We get them on shows which are a right fit. We do work in the health and wellness space, so we don't just work with yoga teachers, but we have obviously a lot of yoga clients and experience with yoga clients. So for the sake of this show, like I'll be speaking about them, obviously. So yeah, and from that, there's multiple opportunities that come from it. And like I've mentioned, you're not just thinking about, oh, am I getting leads or am I getting sales? Because the thing is there's a whole space after the podcast. While podcasting does accelerate this know and trust factor, it doesn't necessarily mean that someone's going to buy from you immediately. And one mistake we see a lot of people make is they have this assumption like, oh, someone's going to hear me and then they're going to want to welcome me. That's it. Like people are just going to make that jump. But realistically, we need far more touch points before we want to buy something from someone often. And don't get me wrong, that has happened before where people have heard our clients on a podcast and been like, right, and then it'll sign up. Like we had one high ticket sale recently where like someone heard them on a podcast and was like immediately jumped in. That's great. And that does happen. But to assume that all your sales are going to be like that, I think is a little bit optimistic. And instead, what you should do is assume that there's going to be a whole nurturing period that comes after the podcast. And that's why we really say, get them to sign up to your newsletter. And the newsletter really is the next step. Like once a listener has heard you on a podcast and they're like, I like this person, encourage them to sign up to your newsletter because then they can keep up to date with your offers, what you're doing, and you get an understanding of, okay, this is their listener. This is a listener, and you get to know their name, their email, and you get to understand a bit about them. Because if you say, go to my website, they might go to your website and then bounce off. And you never know them, you never hear them, you don't really know anything about them. You don't even know they were ever there. But at least if they sign up to your newsletter, you know about them. If you don't have a newsletter, but maybe you're active on Instagram, for example, you can send them there. I would say that's less effective just because we know that emails really are the best channel for nurturing. But I would say that would be my advice to your question there.
Mm-hmm. And then outside of just asking people when they become clients, like how they found you, how can people track whether specifically people are coming through these podcast guesting to find out if it is working, or maybe it's something else that's building their newsletter list?
Yeah, that's really difficult. And I will admit, like within podcasting, still that's one of the hardest parts because we don't have that same as if you're like in social media, you kind of track clicks, or if you're like in ads, it's easier to track these things. Whereas podcasting is more kind of like emotional in that sense. Like someone listens to you and they build up a deep connection, and maybe 6 months later they remember you and then sign up with you, or something along those lines. And you might not even know that they've signed up with you until you actually get them on a call or you're speaking and you're like, where did you first hear about me? And I get some people come to me and they're like, I heard you on a podcast. I'm like, which one? They're like, I don't know. And I'm like, okay, it's not, I'm like, it's kind of surprising to me that like they can't remember, but this is just how like the human mind works. Like they just hear of you, and then it can be really hard to just track that. But it's valuable. Like people remember you, even if that person didn't remember where they heard me, but they did hear me on a podcast and they remembered me. But one of the things that you can do to encourage people to reach out potentially is say at the end of a course, or at the end of a podcast, say reach out to me and mention this specific word. I might say just reach out to me and say all mats, and I'll give you this free gift. And you can reach out to me on Instagram, LinkedIn, wherever you're active. That can be a good opportunity to encourage people to reach out if you really make the link compelling. I find that sometimes like difficult because it can be like you some people might not always be ready to even reach out or speak to you. That's why I still think the newsletter is a better option, because people are okay and naturally conditioned to give up their email to get something small. But certainly if someone's listening and they feel brave enough to be like, I'm going to go reach out to this person I just heard, and that absolutely happens. That's happened to Kelly Smith a number of times, the client that I mentioned, when she's been on shows. Then give them a reason to reach out to you, and you'll know, okay, they heard me on this podcast, and give them a specific phrase to say, and then you can give them a free gift. And when people sign up to your newsletter, make sure that you have a question which says, how did you find me? And then give them the options. And they can either type it in, or you can have a drop down menu. For example, for our newsletter, we have a drop down menu and it says podcasting or podcast guesting. And then we understand, okay, exactly how this like email subscriber found us. And it could also be the same when you work with clients. If you have a client book a call, like whenever we have a prospect book a call with us, a discovery call, we give them the option to say like, where did you find us? Or we're always asking them in any kind of like point of contact where they're like finding us or signing up for us. It's like, how did you find us? And then obviously like just asking your clients when you speak to them for the first time, like, how did you find us, if they haven't already shared that information. But those are, as of now, the best opportunities to discover this information.
I was thinking you could have a very specific newsletter opt-in form that you just give out to the podcast host, so then you can track the metrics from that form. But then that only works if they're like going to the show notes and like clicking it. Whereas if they're just searching you, then that one you'll still miss some, but that might get a few at least.
That is a good option. That is a good option certainly if they do go to the show notes, you encourage them to go to the show notes. One of the issues that we sometimes find is that maybe a host might not always remember to put the right link in or add that specific show notes, which can be difficult. So we always encourage people to take control of the interview by saying at the call to action or throughout the episode, oh, you can find this here, or visit our website, or kind of within the audio itself, go do this. But certainly that's a good idea. At the end of the episode, be like, I'll do your link and you can follow the show notes to this. And then, yeah, there could be a specific landing page where it's, hi, all Matt's taken listeners, here's your free gift for listening. And you can easily make that landing page and just copy it and just change the title each time with the podcast name. And that is an option that works as well. So yeah, good recommendation.
Yeah, it just depends on how many podcasts you're going on, and then it could just get, you don't want it to get like insanely messy on the back end if you've got 100 of these forms at some point. With all of your experience as a podcast guest and a host and a producer and everything, are there any commonalities between guest interviews that really help lead people to sales and clients versus those that just don't end up getting inquiries?
I would say it does all come down to the foundation of your strategy, which is what are the shows you're getting on? How well aligned are they to your audience? And I think that I might have repeated that like probably 3 or 4 times. So I know your audience are like, Sam, I get it. Okay, I'll be selective in the shows that I choose. But it does come down to that because when you say yes to a show and you accept it, there's the time that you spend scheduling the interview, there's the time that you should spend preparing for it, there's the time that you spend on the call. So it takes up all this time. And if you don't select your shows correctly, then that's going to be time that you could have spent going after shows that do align for you. So I think just being selective of the shows and also like case studies, like mention how you've worked with clients, like how you've managed to create an impact for your clients and give really specific examples so that people listening be like, okay, yeah, that's me, or I can relate to that, or I can understand that, or that makes sense. So I think those are the two things, like deliver value and be promotional, but organically and naturally, and making sure that you're speaking to the right audience. I think those are the two things which are just a non-negotiable if you do want to get clients or leads or opportunities come from your podcast interviews.
Do you help coach people on what they're saying as part of your services?
Yeah, we do. So we listen to our clients on podcasts, and we do that for a number of reasons. One, because it really helps us refine our approach. So if we are pitching, we will listen to the episode, and maybe the client says something that we haven't heard before, even though we've done like this very thorough onboarding process. We've listened to all their information. The host asks something and suddenly they share something about their history, which we're like, wow, we didn't know that, but that's super useful. And then we'll incorporate that from our pitches. So our pitches are constantly getting more refined, stronger. We can come up with other pitch angles. And it's like this sense of our strategy is growing, but also so is our knowledge. And the two kind of fuse together from us listening to those episodes. And additionally, we can provide feedback. So we can say, you know what, you did great here, but maybe drop a client example to highlight this. Or maybe at the call to action, just send them here and do this. So yeah, absolutely. We offer interview guidance as well.
I can see that being really handy. And what mistakes do you see new guest podcasters making a lot?
So I think a lot of them probably make the mistakes that I mentioned previously. Those are the most common ones. Like I said, like being overly promotional or just delivering value and forgetting that they're there to promote themselves and their services. So they forget to mention case studies or examples to their clients. I also think maybe just repeating the same answers again and again when they do get on shows, not tailoring the message to the audience. So they just speaking as if they would speak to any kind of like broad audience, forgetting that actually, you know what, I'm on a podcast speaking to yoga teachers. I should tailor my message to them, that sort of thing. So I think those are the main mistakes that people make, and just not doing enough research, like not really knowing what the show's about or who the shows are for. So I host Mics to Millions, which is a podcast to help health and wellness podcasters. So that includes like yoga teachers as well. So if you're a yoga teacher and you have a podcast and you want to grow it, then Mics to Millions is a show for you. You're one of the people that I designed the show for. And I will have people come on and I really specify our show is not about launching a podcast. It's not helping people launch a podcast. It's a show for people who are maybe podcasting for a year or two, or they've spent time working on this podcast, but it's not giving them the growth that they want. They're not seeing the numbers they want. They're not seeing the ROI that they want. And sometimes I'll have guests come on and they'll just say the same things that like they mention in lots of episodes, and they say the same thing that so many guests share, where they're like, oh, launching a podcast is really time consuming. It takes up a lot of time. You got to do the editing, you got to do this, and you got to do that. And it's like, my audience isn't necessarily launching a podcast. Like they're deep into their podcast. And I feel like that's a small kind of understanding that can make a huge difference when someone comes on and talks about the difficulties of the early stages of podcasting and how difficult it is, versus someone that comes on and says, 2 years into your podcasting journey, you want to have this, or you can expect this, and those are the difference. That's the difference in insights that really make a big difference. And those are the kind of insights that I'm going to be like wanting to keep in and deliver to my audience. But if someone comes on and they just talk about how difficult it is to keep up a podcast and why people like fade after a few episodes, it's not really relevant for my audience. And I'm probably going to end up like editing it out. And you want to make sure that your insights are valuable, because otherwise that might happen. They might end up or cut out the episode, and things that you wanted to share or say just get cut because it's mixed in with information that is just not really applicable or useful for the audience.
Yeah, you don't want to be preaching to the choir effectively. And someone that's like maybe struggling and isn't seeing the results as being a guest, how would you troubleshoot this to make it worthwhile? What would be your first plan of action or first step that you were to take?
Like I mentioned, track your pitches, find out how many you're sending out. So we like to test a pitch with, we usually have an understanding of if a pitch is working after sending it to 10 to 15 podcasters. From that, if we see bookings come in, then we know that, okay, this is working. If at that point it's not really got any like real tangible results, or if we've got some declines, then we realize, okay, this isn't resonating. We either need to drop this or we need to make some changes. You also need to look at timing as well. Understand, are you sending pitches out at the right time? Like, you might be sending them at a time which is just not landing in the inbox of the host correctly. I mean, right now I'm in Tbilisi in Georgia, and you're in New Zealand. If I was to send you a pitch which was like, I don't know, Friday morning my time, that would be a terrible time. It's going to arrive in your inbox at Friday afternoon, I think, anyway. but but I mean, for many people who are probably listening and maybe they're in the US, then yeah, like they have to be really careful of when they send you a pitch to be on All Mats Taken, because it might land in your inbox at the worst possible time. And then maybe like Monday morning, you're going through your email, just clearing things out, and you're like, delete, I got to get on with my work. Delete, who is this? I don't know. Delete. You want to make sure that you land at the right time. Ideally, we recommend Tuesday mornings are quite good. That's when we send out our pitches. There's data around that to suggest that that's a good time to arrive in someone's inbox. So make sure you're getting the timing right. Additionally, there are certain months of the year which are better for pitching than others. For example, January, fantastic. Not like at the very start of January, but around around like early January can be good, to mid-January, that time. And then like beyond into early February is quite good, because people are starting fresh for the year and they want new guests. They're starting their business endeavors. A lot of good energy around that time when it comes to business. So that's a good time to pitch. Same with September. People are fresh off the summer holidays, and that's a good time to pitch. And then on the flip side of that, like summer can be somewhat slow. So June, July, August can be somewhat slow in that sense, because people are outside of their regular routine. December can be quite slow. November to some extent, because the end of it, because of Thanksgiving in the US. So if you're like sending a ton of pitches, and for like you and I, late November, November 25th, whenever Thanksgiving is, I believe that's the date. For you and I, like that means nothing to us. We're not American. We're not celebrating Thanksgiving. But if you're sending those like a huge chunk of pitches, you just worked on 15 pitches and you send them on Thanksgiving to a ton of US hosts, you're probably going to get buried in a load of like in an inbox. So be very conscious of how you're sending pitches when you're sending them, and make sure to follow up. We find that 34% of our pitches are accepted after one follow-up, and 15% of them are accepted after two follow-ups. So follow-ups really are important. Just be polite, be kind. Don't be annoying about it. Don't be one of the comments I get from a lot of hosts on Mics to Millions when I ask them about what it's like receiving guest pitches and what they look for. And they say that they hate the insincere, annoying follow-ups that come 24 hours and they're like, oh, hi, am I bothering you yet? Or something along those lines. And yeah, just be a decent human being and just be like, hey, I don't know if you have a chance to check this out, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. And I'd say space a week between each follow-up, so you give them ample time to respond. So as long as you're taking all of this in, then you should be seeing results. And if you're not seeing results, then maybe you have to look at like why you think this pitch isn't working, and maybe just try a completely fresh approach.
Those are good tips. So first, probably looking at your timing, and then if that seems to be okay, looking at the topic and making sure that you are following up would be your sort of first 3 steps to take.
Yeah, 100%.
How many follow-ups are, like, too many?
So I suppose this is more of an art than a science. There might be like some science on this because there are some like sales professionals, websites, whatever, that say you need to do a ton of follow-ups. And I'm sure that's true. I'm sure that sending 7 follow-ups might lead to more yeses, but at the same time, at Podwritten, we're more focused on developing like decent relationships rather than just being like forcing our clients onto people. And I think podcasters, they're not like businesses, or it's not as transactional. Podcasters want that personal touch. They want to understand that like you've heard the show, they're a real human being. They want that kind of like connection, and they want to feel like, yeah, I like this person and I like the person representing them. Because someone's not going to, someone might like a guest, but if the person that's representing them and the agency is representing them poorly, or if you are a great guest, but you're just kind of being rude or pushy, then that can reflect poorly. So we do just send 2 follow-ups. We send the pitch and then we send 2 follow-ups. So a week later, if we haven't heard back, send a follow-up. That usually includes some extra information. And then the final follow-up is just to say, hey, one last time, just want to check in. And that's what we recommend. Now, if there are other people listening and they're like, actually, I would suggest more follow-ups, then great. But another thing that we're conscious of is we don't want to pester people, not only because we want to be good human beings, but because we also don't want to end up being blocked or deleted by people, because then it's going to make our email like a bit more, I suppose, spammy, or we're going to have some sort of issues potentially. And we don't want that. No one wants their email to be flagged as suspicious. There's a lot of, in our opinion, there are valid reasons to be cautious about how many follow-ups you're sending and how much time you give them in between. I think really it just comes down to being fair and decent, and think about what would you think is fair? How would you want someone to treat you when it comes to follow-up? So if someone wanted something from you, and it was a legitimate and fair offer, and if you were busy and maybe you don't have time to respond to them, like how would you want them to follow up, and kind of reflect that in your outreach?
I guess if you want to try and pitch them again, maybe in a year or something, to test your boundaries, and you want to leave like it nicely. I must say, you've probably been the only person from like a company that's pitched me that I've been like very happy about receiving it, and then it's mainly because it aligned as well. I've had quite a few podcast agencies, I guess, reach out with guests, and I'm like, this isn't at all the type of person that I would have on the show. So you clearly haven't done like much homework. So I think that is definitely really key. Is there anything that we haven't covered today that you think having a booking specialist like yourself can be helpful for, rather than trying to do it yourself?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I've been working in podcast guesting since 2021. So as we record this, it's 4 years now. And with that, I've built up a large network with podcasters like yourself and many yoga teachers. We've got a huge back catalog of yoga podcasts where we've worked with in the past. So certainly if someone was to come and work with us, then they don't have to do that legwork of reaching out, building up those connections. One of the benefits of working with us is you immediately have access to our network. And hosts like yourself know that we only send aligned pitches and that we only send out high quality pitches. So they're very receptive. They're going to be like, okay, Sam's messaged me, or Podwritten's sent me a pitch. Yeah, I'm going to check it out. Versus who's this random person at gmail.com that sent me like a pitch. So that's one benefit. I mean, again, I would highly encourage anyone listening to, even if they just want to get started, by all means, and you're not at a place where you can work with an agency, just try and pitch yourself. Definitely. We have a ton of resources at podwritten.com. We have a blog, which is all about how to pitch yourself. And we have tons of insights there. People can go to podwritten.com and find that out, and also check out our blogs. And Mike's to Millions is obviously the podcast I mentioned. If you're a health and wellness podcaster, yoga podcaster, then you can check that podcast out too. So yeah, that would be, I suppose those would be that would be the main benefit I'd see of working with an agency like ours. But even if you're not at a stage to work with us, then there's a ton of free resources that we share which can help you.
Awesome. And you have a DIY course as well for people?
Yeah. Yeah, we have a DIY course. So essentially it's a 3-hour one-on-one with my co-founder and wife. So my wife and I run Podwritten, and you get a 3-hour session with us. They can ideally we do it in one go, but certainly we can break that up if necessary, because I realize people have commitments. Not everyone has 3 hours they can carve out of their day. And with that, we share our complete strategy, our secret sauce that has helped us get dozens and dozens of bookings for our yoga teachers. And yeah, we share everything. And we also help you craft like a special pitch that you can send out yourself. We essentially give you all the tools. So I suppose the best way to think of it is like, it's kind of like IKEA in the sense that we either build the bed for you, or we can give you the DIY course where it explains everything on how to put the bed together.
Awesome. I like that analogy. All right. Let's jump round to our rapid fire questions. Outside of podcasting, what is one marketing strategy that has surprised you and how well it's worked?
Okay, so maybe this isn't a fair answer because we are Podwritten, which is podcast guesting and podcasting fused with content writing, hence the name. But blogging has been fantastic for us. We focus on podcasting and content writing, so that's how we get all our leads. That's how we get all our business. But blogging has been fantastic, and the reason why I say that is because we have so many leads come out to us through ChatGPT, Perplexity, all of these businesses, like they find us, they're like, oh, ChatGPT told me about you. We even had one discovery call yesterday where we said like, oh, we know you found us through ChatGPT, and you said that ChatGPT gave you 2 options. Why did you decide us over the other option ChatGPT gave you? And they said, ChatGPT told me to go with you. She literally just asked ChatGPT, which of these 2 options you gave me would be a better fit? And they said Podwritten. So, and that was all down to blogging and the guesswork though. And that, yeah, so content writing. So I would say blogging is definitely underrated. It might take some time, but it's well worth it.
That's awesome. And that very much like negates the whole SEO is dead that everyone was raging about earlier this year with the AI rise. And other than that, how are you using AI in your business?
So I think for me, it really helps with my podcast. So Mike's to Millions, whenever I'm coming up with the introductions for the show and I'm introducing, at the beginning, I like to come up with a custom introduction. I like to do an outro as well, come up with episode titles. I don't think AI is ever good to completely replace anything. You should never be like, oh, I don't need to do this now. I'm just going to put this in ChatGPT and it'll give me the answer. But I definitely find that like I come up for a title and I'm like, this title's a bit too long, or maybe it's not right this. And it was so helpful to go, give me 10 options for this. Gives me 10 options. Maybe I like the first half of one of their suggestions and the second half for another. I kind of fuse them. I check to see how it's doing on Google. Are people searching for this? I kind of have a look around. But I really think mixing in this AI for creativity and just like fusing it with your own kind of like thoughts and ideas, for me, it's been super beneficial for creating better content for Mike's to Millions.
Yeah, that's a really handy use case. And lastly, if you could go back to your first year of entrepreneurship, what advice would you give yourself?
I would say seek out like every opportunity you can. Don't overlook opportunities because it's so easy to think, oh, this is done, or I can't get anything here, or that won't be worth my time. And yeah, sometimes things won't be fruitful, but there are times when I've gone and guested on a show, which I'm like, does this even really have an audience? Or am I going to get any connections from this? Or I've accepted like joining calls and I've just been like, I don't know if something's going to come from this, but like on that call, I've met someone nothing came from the actual call itself, but I met someone who's like a perfect client for our business. And then we end up chatting and we end up staying connected, or things come from things that you don't expect. So I think just be open, be willing to try things, keep a very open mind, and understand that there are opportunities at every level, as long as you're open to them.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today, Sam. And I will have the links for Podwritten and all of the newsletter and everything that you mentioned in the show notes for anyone that wants to go check it out and discover the joy of being a podcast guest.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I really love this. This has been so different from many of the shows that I've guested on. So I really appreciate that.
Mommy been around. Whee! A fast. Fast. Fast.